Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first webinar in our 2022-2023 series on The World Sings. My name is Mike McMahon, and I'm the Executive Director of the Hymn Society in the United States and Canada. It's great to welcome you to this webinar with Dr. Jonathan Tan, who is the Archbishop Paul J. Hallinan Professor of Catholic Studies in the Department of Religious Studies and affiliated faculty in the Chinese Ethnic Studies, Asian Studies, and International Studies programs at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. And the great thing about Jonathan is that he's not just a great scholar, he's also a practitioner of church music. And so I know that he's going to have some really great insights for us today on Asian and Asian American Catholic church music. Before we get started, we've got a little poll. Now, there are only a few of you on this, but we want to know how long you've been Hymn Society members. So Brian is going to put up a little poll here for you to fill out and go to it. And we've got quite a variety of responses from everything from I'm not a member to 5 to 10 years to more than 20 years as Hymn Society members. So that's great. The other poll we have today is to find out how much you know about Asian and Asian American Catholic church music. So that poll is coming up also. See what, Brian, yeah, there it is. I love the responses. You can see none of you has written a book on this topic. So that's probably good for Jonathan. No competition today. All right. Looks like we've got some knowledge, but not too much. So that's good, Jonathan. You'll have a lot to share with us today. So just one thing, you can use the chat function to comment, or you can use the Q&A to ask questions. There's going to be a question and answer period at the end of this webinar, and Brian will come back on and he will curate those questions and lead a discussion of your questions with Jonathan. So welcome, Jonathan. Take it away.
Okay, thank you very much, Mike. Let me share my screen to get started. Okay, my presentation is entitled In Our Own Voices, Asian and Asian American Catholic Liturgical Song. Let me start with a quote by my good friend and colleague, Sui Hong. Lin Sui Hong, which many of you would know, active Hymn Society member who does sacred music, Asian Protestant congregational song. That's what he focuses on. In a recent article, he says something about to the effect that writing from the Asian Protestant perspective, worship music is still primarily Western. And that, by and large, is true when you look at Asian Protestant Christians and their congregational song. And I have a few points by comparison with Asian Catholics. The thing about music, my starting thesis is this: we cannot look at music and singing in isolation. They have to be the outcome of a confluence or intersection of factors, and some of my arguments being that is from a sociological perspective. If the song has to flow from lived experiences, the kind of formation, the intersections of identity, culture, ethnicity, if none of those are present, then and the identity and the formation is primarily Western or European, then the congregational song would reflect that formation. So when we look at Asian Catholics, my introduction argument is that Asian Catholics are very, very different from Asian Protestants. They have a much longer history, and I suppose there is a lot more intersections between culture, ethnicity, identity formation, and that is reflected in the liturgy and music. But first, before we go into that, let me outline how my presentation will proceed. So it's essentially two parts. The first part, I'm going to look at Asian Catholics as an overview to set out a context for us to understand why there is a robust Asian Catholic congregational song, liturgical song, compared to the Protestants. And in the second part, we look at a few representative examples. Because this is a very short presentation, there's no way to go through every example. So I just pick up a few examples that will highlight some of the major developments. So Asian Catholics, when we talk about Asian Catholics, we start with the fact that they are a vibrant, growing group. Very often, you can see them immersed in the local culture and identity. So, a good representative examples are like the visit of when Pope Francis first visit to Asia, in Sri Lanka. So you can see examples, and in the Philippines, where you can see the big crowd that turn out for mass. So when we talk about Asian Catholics, it is a very big growing group, even though by relation to the population of Asia as a whole, they still remain a small minority. So when we look at Asian Catholics, at the beginning of the 20th to the of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century, we can see that the Catholic population has grown from 5% to 12%. It is still relatively small compared to the rest of the world. And of course, if by the share of the population, it's a very tiny growth from 1 to 3%. Now, Asian Catholics, or Christianity for that matter, when we compare Asia with the rest of the world, in other parts of the world, Christians are a majority. So which means when we look at congregational song, worship, Christians generally and Catholics in particular can establish their own context, culture, society, social formation, and such, where where they can be in their own communities, and their theologizing and their worship can assume forms that are self-referential, so that you do not need to be in dialogue or to engage with anything outside church or community. When you look at Asia Pacific, where Christians are a minority compared to all the other traditions, there are two approaches. One, you can either hunker down, and you see that in many Asian Protestants. So you hunker down and you assume a Western, European, Eurocentric identity, or you can engage with the culture and the society around you. So when we talk about Asia, just to set up the context for understanding Asia. So I highlight here 7 characteristics of Asia that will also affect religion, mission, theologies, worship, evangelization, and such. So we talk about Asia: massive poverty, many religions, diverse cultures, massive immigration. Of the top 10 countries in the world for migration, 7 are located in Asia. Because from the previous slide, we see Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, and other religions. So the kind of intercultural and interfaith families are especially big in Asia. And so we talk about multiple belongings and intersectional identities, hybridized devotional and popular ritual practices, and this cuts across all religions and cultures, whether it's popular Hinduism, popular Buddhism, Taoism, Chinese religions, and of course Catholicism too. At the same time, Asia, you see lots of violence, religious violence, ethnocentrism, exclusivism, communalism, nationalism. And so from these 7 characteristics, we move on to Catholicism. So when we look at Asian Catholicism, as in contrast with Catholicism from, say, Latin America or Africa or Europe, so challenges of migration. Asian Catholics are always on the move. And so the idea of being in a single parish, not moving, is that you find in Europe or North America, it is pretty much not the case in Asia, where Asian Catholics, many of whom are educated, end up being migrating for work, or they could also be migrating because of wars, conflict, and such. The second point that I want to make is the intersection between faith, culture, and ethnicity. Whereas intersectionality is something that is a new paradigm in North America. Kimberly Crenshaw, who popularized it and is now adopted by many theologians and sociologists. Intersectionality has always been the case in Asia. Faith, culture, ethnicity, and the rise of popular piety devotions, the reality of martyrdom. Of course, in such a pluralistic environment, as a very small community, a little flock, as a minority community, dialogue is important, because if a minority community does not get to define the conversation, and you do not have the power dynamics are such that a dialogue as a means of survival, as a means to thrive. So these are 5 points. Sometimes the easiest way to see, is to illustrate by examples. So to understand how music would fit, sometimes we have to see how the other factors interact. So St. Mary's Church in Dubai, the largest Catholic parish church worldwide, it's not in Europe, it's not in North America, it's in Dubai, with 300,000 parishioners, almost 500,000, with 35 to 40 masses in 12 languages, 80,000 hosts. And you can see a typical Friday mass. They start on Friday because Friday is a Muslim day of prayer all the way to Sunday. And you can tell that even though it's Dubai, it's Muslim, they have a huge migrant population working in hospitality, healthcare, and the petroleum industries. And all these are Catholics from Philippines, India, Indonesia, and elsewhere. So that gives you an example of the thriving diversity. So Simbang Gabi, the Filipino Advent pre-Christmas popular devotion. The Filipino community was so large that they could not fit the church. Simbang Gabi took place in the parking lot outside. The average crowd each night was 14,000. That tells you, larger than mega churches in the US. Examples of faith, culture, and ethnicity: the Lunar New Year Mass. This is in my home country, Malaysia, Philippines, around different parts of Southeast Asia. And this at St. Mary's Cathedral in San Francisco, the Lunar New Year Mass. In South Asia, in India, the Indian Rite Mass. The Misa ang Sambayang Filipino, in the Filipino Mass, in Vietnamese. And of course, when we talk about faith, culture, and ethnicity, it's just not just in the liturgical, but also in the popular piety and devotions. So when the idea of social formation from sociology, that popular devotions are important, and we'll see this because very often the congregational liturgical song also reflects popular piety from the ground up. So examples of popular piety: Our Lady of Good Health. This is the largest Marian pilgrimage in the world, even larger than Fatima or Lourdes in Europe. There are several million coming for this pilgrimage, Catholic, Hindu, and Muslims. So you can see it's multiple belonging. Filipino, Vietnamese. This is in Carthage, Missouri, where you have about every August, the Marian days, about easily 200,000 Vietnamese from across North America will gather in pilgrimage in Carthage, Missouri, Our Lady of Lavang. This is in Australia. And of course, when we talk about Catholicism, there's a long history of martyrdom. The Japanese martyrs, the Korean martyrs, Chinese martyrs, Vietnamese martyrs, and of course the importance of dialogue. And so the Asian bishops talk about the threefold dialogue with cultures, religions, and the poor and marginalized. So you can see how the Latin American liberation theology, which is number 3, has been expanded, in an intersectional manner to the intersectionality of liberation, enculturation, and interreligious dialogue. All right, let's come to the music. So that sets up the context. With music, we start with the Philippines. Father Eddie Honti, father of Filipino Catholic liturgical music, Jesuit. He's the most well-known because every Filipino composer builds on his legacy. And what I'll do is I'll play a representative example and comment on it, and you can get to see. So there's a thriving, Tagalog music that, a repertoire that every Filipino would know. For example, I know his music because the Filipino domestic helpers or maids in Singapore, I used to do the Filipino Sunday masses for the Filipino community in Singapore. And so everyone from Filipino maids to professionals know the music. The same true of the Filipino diaspora in North America. So his most famous example, the Glory to God, Papurisa Dios. Let me highlight a few points and you can listen to it. So here is a good example of the kind of congregational singing that we associate with Filipino Baroque exuberance that Ansgar Shupungo talks about. So you can see elements of congregational singing, easy, catchy refrain, call response, and because of the Filipino flair for the flamboyant, the Lamb of God, you take away the sins of the world, have mercy on us, is sung by a soloist. So that's the music, and let's hear segments of it. So this is how it goes.
Gloria in excelsis Deo.
Just fast forward to the Lamb of God, you take away the sins of the world. Since we don't have time to play the entire clip. The refrain is repeated. Okay, so that segment, so the soloist will sing the Lamb of God, you take away the sins of the world, and then the congregation assembly would respond. So it's a call response. So as you can see here, it blends elements of Spanish. So that for those of you who work with Latin American, Latino congregations. You can see elements of their Spanish influence with local indigenous Filipino influence. So it's like a double belonging, hybridities. It has a kind of Filipino flair and Baroque exuberance that you associate both with Spanish Baroque culture as well as the traditional Filipino love of fiestas and celebrations that many across many Asian cultures. So it's an example of, I think, one of his most famous Gloria, catchy, easy to learn. It was also the Gloria that was used in the Asian Synod opening Mass. So from here we move on to the second. So this is actually pananagutan, or responsibility, is Father Eddie Honti's most famous music that has crossed over beyond the Catholic Church or Catholic, that it becomes a kind of Filipino cultural or national song. But it's actually it is a congregational song, and it's basically like no one is an island, no one stands alone. We stand together in responsibility. We are responsible for one another, you know. So, and this is how it goes. So I'll just play you a short clip. So the first song, the Gloria, is only available in Filipino. There's no English translation. For this one, Pananagutan, OCP has a trilingual version with the English translation by Ricky Manalos, which many of you might know, and a Chinese version. So there's a trilingual version that you can get from OCP. So this is one of those crossover pieces that has an English version. And we move the third song. The other thing to know about Filipino music, and I've got Father Eddie Honti wrote, I think, about 400 plus songs. So I just taking some of his representative examples, songs that have influenced subsequent generation of Filipino liturgical composers like Manoling Francisco and others, even Ricky himself. So this is a third example where the kind of emotive, the kind of powerful emotions that you find typical of for those, if you interact with Filipino cultures and Filipinos. This is the reinterpretation of the Ubi Caritas. So this is Dakilang Pag-ibig, and let me just play a short clip of that, one verse. Where is my...
Walang alinlangan.
All right. In this example, the difference between this one and the Papurris a Dios, the Gloria, the Papurris a Dios has Spanish influence. You can hear a hybrid between Spanish and Filipino. This example, Dakilang Paibig, I use because it is 100% Filipino. So Filipino love songs, Filipino folk, Filipino contemporary song. You can hear this. This is 100% indeed Filipino with no Spanish influence. One of a song that is often used during Lent in Philippines and among the Filipino diasporic communities across the world. Ubi paraphrase of Ubi Caritas. All right, from Father Eddie Honti, we move on to Filipino American and Ricky Manalo, some of whom you may have used some of his music. Because Ricky is a crossover. He's Filipino American, Paulie's father. He writes both in a Western European context as well as in the Filipino Asian context. So let me just I just have two of his music that are well known in the in the Asian American communities in North America. By the Waking of Our Hearts that he wrote, this is his reinterpretation or reimagination of the Pentecost sequence, the Veni Sancte Spiritus. So here, what Ricky has done is to fuse primarily East Asian. So you can see here elements of Chinese as well as Japanese and Filipino style. So this is a kind of hybridized style that appeal to a pan-Asian American Catholic community across different ethnic communities. Ricky has also written something that is more Filipino, and this is very popular in both English-speaking and Filipino, because this is a very contemporary Filipino style, the Ang Katawan ni Cristo, a bilingual Filipino-English hymn.
Of our God, as we gather here in Christ, feel the Spirit breathe upon us, the breath of life, graced and divine. We have come to break the bread, we have come to share our lives. Let us bring these fruits to the table, the love of God, yours and mine. Ang katawan ni Cristo, ang katawan
So when you listen to this, I always think of folks like Lea Salonga and others. So this is a contemporary Filipino style that many of the Filipino liturgical composers, whether in the Philippines or in the US, like Ricky has done. So it's a crossover that combines contemporary Filipino popular music style, as compared to, say, Father Eddie Honti, which writes more in the folk tradition. Moving on, let's move to Chinese. So enculturation in China has a very, very long history. This dates from 1948. So if you look at the date at the bottom, it's early, even before the fall of China to communist. This is a representative example of the kind of songs that Chinese Catholics, even before Vatican II, with dispensation from Propaganda Fide, the Congregation for Missions, have been using. So in this example, you can see it's a very traditional Chinese folk style that chant-like. So it adopts from Buddhist chanting, adapted into congregational song. So this is just it's thanks be to God. It's meant to be sung as a thanksgiving hymn, usually after communion. In this particular example that I'm playing, it is sung in Cantonese in a Catholic church in Hong Kong. As typical in many Chinese Catholic parishes, what you see is there's a use of the organ that missionaries are inculcated, but so you find a hybridity. So there's organ combined with traditional Chinese musical forms, where the organ tries to imitate, as you can see, the interlude, traditional Chinese instruments. So which makes for very interesting hybridities and intersection between East and West, Catholic and indigenous Chinese. The second example is post-Vatican. So this is a pre-Vatican II, 1948, a very old example, just to show you that it has a very long history. And the next one, this dates from 1973. So this is more post-Vatican II. This is the Lord's Prayer. That is the most commonly used version of Lord's Prayer across the Chinese diaspora. And here it is sung in Mandarin. The earlier version was sung in Cantonese. Okay, so that's basically, so you can see why it works in China even before Vatican II is because from Gregorian chant to Buddhist chant, organ and modern, you can see. So what happens? I think what allows, as you can see, both from the Filipino and the Chinese example so far, is the reason it works is rooted in something that's both indigenous as well as in what the missionaries brought. And there's a kind of hybridities where you can see the intersection and the integration between Western and Eastern forms and creates a new genre that is that you can recognize the indigenous elements. At the same time, you can still find elements of, say, Catholicism, that they use of the organ, and a Buddhist chant that is similar to Gregorian chant. Moving on to Vietnam, the thing, because there's a huge Vietnamese Catholic diaspora in North America, OCP, have published a Vietnamese hymnal, the Thánh Ca Giảng Chúa, hymnal of God's praise. There are 450 plus hymns. You have 100 over Vietnamese composers, and because many Vietnamese, the younger generation, are bilingual, so they are bilingual English and Vietnamese. So again, to illustrate, both, just as in China, Vietnam too has a very long history. Before I forget, the Chinese example, there are no English translations. It has been hard to translate the Chinese into English. And in this case, like Hang Belem, this is in Vietnamese, an example of a pre-Vatican II. This is 1945. Bui Chu is in northern Vietnam. It's a very Catholic region of northern Vietnam. It's like the entire region is Catholic majority. 1945. Now, if you listen to this, you can tell that it is very French with some Vietnamese cultural elements. This is the most famous Vietnamese Christmas carol. It means and Hang Belem. So in a cave or in a manger in Bethlehem. So let's hear it, and you can hear the French and the Vietnamese hybridities. So as you can hear, this is essentially a creative reimagination of the French carol Il est né le devant enfant. He is here, the Christ child, whatever. You can hear elements of the kind of French, traditional French forms fused with traditional Vietnamese forms. So in 1945, you can see the kind of creative work that was already been done by the Vietnamese Catholics of Bui Chu in northern Vietnam. Many of them fled to the south in the airlift of 1954, and then in 1975, many of these Catholics have come to North America, because historically most of the Vietnamese Catholics came from the northern region, North Vietnam. That was where the French did most of their evangelization. So from this example of hybridities, you can see after Vatican II, there's a lot more daring and more creative, and you can see leaving the French elements behind and being more confident in adopting traditional Vietnamese elements. So this one dates from 1965. So this is a very, very old. So this one has no English. Hang Bele has only in Vietnamese. There are no English translation. May the Joy, Beautiful Mother. There is an English translation done in 2000 by Rufino Zaragoza that is available via from OCP, a bilingual version. So this is how it sounds. Let me just play it through. This is from 1965. So it's just in the aftermath of Vatican II. Okay, let me just get the. So you can hear now, in contrast with the early 1945 examples, so by 1965, in the aftermath of the Vatican II, you can see there is an adoption of a very traditional Vietnamese musical form, as you can hear here. Now, if you look at the lyrics, the English paraphrase by Rufino Zaragoza does not actually capture the Vietnamese. So my literal translation of the Vietnamese, and you can compare with the lyrics, the English lyrics by Rufino Zaragoza available from OCP. You can see, for example, in the traditional Vietnamese, you can see the powerful cultural references, imageries. You can see the traditional Vietnamese, like the use of con your child in a refrain. You can like in verse 2, mother is like a fragrant flower always radiating in the 9 heavens. Now, the 9 heavens is a concept you find in popular Chinese Vietnamese religions that evolved from Taoism and popular Buddhism, which also evolved from Taoism. The 9 heavens, I mean, to show the of course in the English translation of verse 2, you can say, your fragrance bloom, piercing, all the creation. I cannot, it's hard to see for myself. So you can see the English translation is merely a paraphrase that captures the kind of powerful symbolism. And you can see a fusion of both traditional Vietnamese, verse 3, like an army in battle array, the Song of Songs, the traditional image, the 12 stars, Revelation. So you can see the back and forth, the kind of combining Vietnamese and Catholic symbolism. And the next song, this one music that was written, so 1965, this is still before really the Vietnam War has started. So this one this particular song, Nguyen Quang Hong, a composer who wrote it in 1975. So in this particular style, you can find the suffering, the pain, the emotions. It's all the kind of pathos that comes with that is that characterize many of the Vietnamese Catholic music that emerged in the 70s and early 80s because of the pain of forced migration, refugees, victims caught in between the communists and others in the Vietnam Civil War that ended in 1975. So this is offering to the Trinity, traditionally an offertory hymn. This one, there is no English translation, unfortunately. Okay, so in this example, you can see a characteristic of Vietnamese Catholic liturgical song, the use of heterophony as opposed to harmony. So you hear the refrain, the heterophony, the men and women, they actually sing in a dialogical form, and it's very often you think it clash, but although it clashes because it's heterophonic, it comes out actually creating a kind of effect that is a characteristic of many Southeast Asian music. You find in Indonesian, you find in Vietnamese, you find in Thai, for example. So this is an example of heterophony and the use of traditional Chinese, Vietnamese instruments like the zither and stuff, and flute and others. Tin Chúa Cao Vời, so this is 1976. This one, I use this example because it has an English translation, Boundless Love, translated by Rufino Zaragoza, available from OCP in a bilingual form. Again, so you can see too, there is in the refrain, there's also an example of heterophony, that the men and women voices sing. They appear to clash, but as again in heterophony, it comes together, it creates a third musical form. So let's listen to it. Tin Chúa Cao Vời, Boundless Love.
Gloria in excelsis Deo.
what is interesting in this example, and what Rufino's paraphrase doesn't really capture in English, is that what you find here is the image of the bodhisattva. The traditional in Vietnamese Buddhism, the bodhisattva, like Kuan Yin, Kuan Am in Vietnamese, the god, the bodhisattva of compassion. That image is used to talk about the compassion and the love of God in this song. So you can see the kind of interreligious intersectionality at play here. Finally, we are running out of time. Just one more last song. I'm just going to skip over this one, and this is my own composition from Malaysia. To give you an example, this is written in a musical style that you find in Malaysia and Indonesia. Basically, my effort at reinterpreting angels we have heard on high using the cultural forms that you find in Malaysia and Indonesia. And okay, so this is a clip performed by the choir of Grace Episcopal Parish in Cincinnati. Okay, so thank you very much. So we are so open for. Sorry, it took longer than I expected, and happy to answer any questions or comments or feedback that you might have.
Thank you so much. Folks, don't forget, if you want to use the ask a question, there's the Q&A function. And in the chat, we already have one question, which was from pretty early on in their presentation. I think it was when you were going over the demographics of Asian Christians. And the question was specifically about whether you considered, or those numbers were considering Anglicans as Protestants. I think it was, there was a slide with, I don't know, Milner, if you remember, you could put this in the chat. That was your question.
I think what it was probably the quote from Sui Hong, and I think Sui Hong was writing in primarily Protestants in general, so Methodists, Presbyterians. I'm not sure whether he considered Anglicans. Anglicans in Japan are a really, really, really small community, and they do have a hymnal that uses Japanese forms. I'm familiar with that. So Anglicans are often closer to Catholics than say the general population. Sui Hong works from a Methodist perspective, and I know, knowing him because he's a good friend, he's writing primarily about Methodists, Presbyterians, Lutherans, you know, the broader demographic, and of course the evangelicals and the Pentecostals. So in this case, I've focused specifically on Catholic, so, and I suppose you can make an argument mutatis mutandis for Anglicans, and in this, because it's such a short presentation, in South Asia, in the Indian subcontinent, there's an entire genre of Catholic music. There's Tamil, Malayalam, Kerala, all kinds of stuff that's impossible to cover. So I've just only focused on East and Southeast Asia. So there is the part that I cannot really cover because that's just impossible to do is South Asia, and that requires its own webinar.
Yeah. Why can't you cover all of Asia in 1 hour? I don't understand. I have a question. And then I think something did pop up in the Q&A. My question is concerning immigration into the U.S., and you did touch a little bit on this. You mentioned a few times in some of the songs that you showed that there weren't English translations, and I'm wondering, with the amount of immigrants that the U.S. has, what is your sense of how much song in the United States, in the Roman Catholic communities, are happening in languages, are being sung in just other languages without U.S. translations, and at what point do you think it might tip to the point where those communities start reaching a place where they need multiple language translations because their communities have existed here long? I'm not sure if I'm saying this well, but I'm thinking about like the Latina communities, right? Where you have a first generation that is quite comfortable singing Spanish only, but then you get communities where you have first, second, third generations where one generation is only Spanish speaking, one is bilingual, and one is only English speaking.
Exactly. So
Is that happening in the US? I guess is my question.
Yeah, the short answer is yes, and it is happening now, which is one of the reasons the Vietnamese Catholic hymnal that was produced. Because up to this point, the Vietnamese Catholics have just been using hymnals that they brought with them when they fled Vietnam as refugees. The OCP bilingual Vietnamese English Catholic hymnal was produced precisely for the fact that US-born Vietnamese American Catholics, the second and third generation, are often not fluent in Vietnamese or barely know enough Vietnamese, but yet they want to sing, to keep the song. It's just like German Catholics brought Stille Nacht. They sang in German. But as more German Catholics grew up in the US, English speaking, so Stille Nacht becomes Silent Night, and Silent Night is now the norm. It's only in a choral presentation people will sing in German, but it was a German Catholic carol. There's the same, like so many of our carols, Polish, French, the immigrants brought it in whatever languages, and it was translated into English because immigration, they no longer speak the language of the motherland. And so we are beginning to see that. So, for example, Ang Katawan ni Cristo, the Ricky Manalo's the song, is extremely popular. It's more popular here and more well known, say, among the Filipinos of North America than say in the Philippines, precisely because it is in English, and in the refrain you have a couple of sentences in Filipino that most US-born Filipino Americans can understand, but primarily English. But the music is a fusion of a pop that combines Hillsong, Filipino, contemporary. If you listen to it, you can pick up elements of everything, and that song is extremely popular. You go to any Filipino Catholic Sunday Mass, that song is sung. So that gives you a sense of the future trajectory. Vietnamese are doing that. The Latino Catholics have already done that. In the parish I work with, we use a lot of bilingual songs.
Well, so in the Q&A, Janet Wooten asks, this is very related, what do you think are the trends for the future? It feels as if hybridity is a creative trend for the future, and how will this be reflected?
I think hybrid, to answer Janet's point, take for example, Tin Chúa Cao Wei, the let me see if I can find my PowerPoint. That's okay. The Vietnamese song that has a bilingual Vietnamese English, the Boundless Love. Now, Boundless Love is I mentioned the song that I pointed out that it borrows imagery of the Bodhisattva and applies the compassion and love of the Bodhisattva to God. That song is now trilingual. The Spanish community of Spanish-speaking Catholics, Latino Catholics, love it so much that now there is a Spanish translation out there. So it can be sung. There's Spanish, Vietnamese, and English. The song crosses boundaries, and you find going forward. I think in North America, I suspect the way forward is where you find composers like Ricky Manalo, US-born composers that would combine different styles. What I showcase more is, in the motherland, the homeland in Asia, so what they are singing. So compared to the Protestant, like the Presbyterians or the Methodists or the Baptists, for whom they are still singing very English, you can see there's a long history. That you walk into any Vietnamese Catholic church in the Philippines or in Vietnam or Taiwan or something, chances are, you hear something that is truly indigenous, as opposed to, say, a translation of some American or European hymn.
I wonder, once again, thinking about some of the Western languages and parallels going on here, such like the German you mentioned, or the Spanish speaking communities. When we start talking about hybridity and translations, we've had a lot of conversations within the Hymn Society about how that works, which feels especially complex for this topic because of the fact that a lot of Asian languages are tonal.
That's right.
Which is a big difference compared to a lot of the European-based languages, which none of which I'm aware of are tonal, or at least none of the major ones like German and Spanish. So I'm wondering, is that an impediment to hybridity? Is that something that people are currently working on? Or I wonder if you could speak a little bit about that particular intersection.
I mean, there are two forms of hybridity. So hybridities in Asia is very different from hybridities, say, in North America. Like hybridities in Asia, the example that I use, the Chinese examples, you can see because both have a strong chant-based tradition, Gregorian chant, the missionaries brought, and the traditional Buddhist chanting. So the both examples, the Lord's Prayer and the other Chinese hymn, that thanks be to God, 感谢天主, that illustrate. You can see the kind of hybridities that incorporates element of two, or in Philippines, the hybridities will be Spanish, like the Gloria, the Papuri a Dios. There's a Spanish plus Filipino elements, or the early Vietnamese examples, French, and so that kind of hybridity, the legacy of missionary, the missionary legacy that brought European plus combined with the local genius and sensibilities. Hybridities in the US is completely different because hybridities in the US, you have US-born second, third, fourth generation who no longer speak the language of the motherland or struggle with the language, which means hybridities have to take a very different form. So even for Latino communities, when you use a bilingual setting done by, say, Bob Hurd or Tony Alonso or someone else, you can see elements of American and Latino cultural elements, as opposed to what you find in Latin America with Spanish and the local, and whether it's mariachi or something else. So you listen to, say, Tony Alonso's bilingual music, or in this case for Latinos, or Ricky Manalo's for Asian, Filipino, you can see hybridities in the US. I think that is the future of hybridities, at least for this here. But because the Hymn Society is an international organization, we just have to understand in Asia, hybridities, because the experiences are very different. It is not the same, because there it is not about not speaking the language. It's about trying to have a dual belonging to both the missionary legacy and the post-colonial indigenous impulse, as opposed to hybridities here, English-speaking, locally born. There's nothing. It's not about post-colonial or missionary anymore. It's about how do you negotiate life as a hyphenated or hybridized American. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so when we talk about music and composition, so there's it raises very, very interesting questions.
Hmm. Wonderful. There's nothing else in the Q&A or the chat that I see, and it is 2:08. So this has been wonderfully informative. I love the musical examples that you provided, and learned so much just by listening to the soundscapes. And I really appreciate your expertise and for presenting for the Hymn Society on this webinar.
That's right, and I think a lesson to be learned, and this is, I wish what's his name, Sui Hong was here, is for the Protestant that Sui Hong, like Methodist, works with, because they've always been Western and just translating Protestant hymns into English. They lack the kind of culture, and I hope you realize that the first part where it shows that the intersection between culture, ethnicity, popular practices, devotions, the enculturation already in the Sunday liturgy, all those has to happen before the music. In many Protestant examples that Sui Hong cited, the quote I put at the beginning, if you start with just music but without the context, it doesn't take root. And there has always been the problem in Asian Protestant, and by definition, Protestant exclude Anglican and Catholics.
All right. Well, thank you so much. This will be archived. So if you want to watch this again, or if you know anyone who would benefit from watching this webinar, please let them know that they can still pay for the webinar series and get access to this archived recording. And we will see you for our next webinar. And remember, we also have the free interviews that are part of our centennial celebration. So I hope you'll continue to join us digitally. And our next in-person gathering will be Montreal 2023. So hope to see you in Canada. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And thank you, Jonathan Tan, for this wonderful presentation.
Thank you. Have a good day.